Before we dive into this explosive story of family betrayal, corporate espionage, and devastating revenge, I want you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for her true stories. What you're about to witness is a tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, class, and the deadly consequences of underestimating the wrong person. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single twist in this incredible journey. My name is Bridget Berry, and at 65, I thought I had seen every form of human cruelty. I was catastrophically wrong. The gunshot that would end my son-in-law's life echoed through the marble corridors of Berry Industries exactly 18 months after he humiliated me at my grandson's birthday party. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we got to that blood-soaked boardroom, you need to know what happened on little Camden's 5th birthday, the day my own family declared war on me. The morning of October 15th started like any other Saturday. I was putting the finishing touches on Camden's birthday gift, a custom-built treehouse that had taken my contractors 3 weeks to complete. Every bolt, every plank, every safety feature had been personally overseen by me. After all, what's the point of being worth $2.3 billion if you can't spoil your only grandchild? Mrs. Berry, my assistant Nicole, had called that morning. The gift has been delivered to the residence. Should I send the installation crew on Monday? No need, I'd replied, applying my signature red lipstick in the mirror of my penthouse suite. I'll be there myself to see Camden's reaction. See, nobody in my family knew about my wealth. To them, I was just Grandma Bridget, the sweet, simple woman who lived in a modest apartment and worked part-time at a local library. My late husband Charles and I had agreed years ago to keep our fortune secret from our children, wanting them to build their own character without the corruption of easy money. Charles had been dead for 3 years now, killed in what the police had ruled a random carjacking.
But I had my suspicions about that, too.
You don't build an empire without making enemies, and some secrets have a way of surfacing when you least expect them. I arrived at my daughter Jessica's McMansion in Westchester at exactly 2 p.m., carrying a modest gift bag containing a $50 toy truck, my public offering to maintain the charade. The real gift, a $75,000 custom treehouse, was already installed in their backyard, waiting to be discovered. Grandma. Camden's voice pierced through the afternoon air as I walked up the driveway. My grandson, a miniature version of his late grandfather with those same piercing blue eyes, came running toward me with the unbridled joy that only children possess. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, lifting him into my arms despite my aging back protesting. "Are you having a wonderful party?" "The best. Daddy invited all his work friends, and Mommy made a castle cake." Camden's excitement was infectious, and for a moment, I forgot about the growing tension I'd been sensing from my daughter and her husband. That's when I heard it, the voice that would haunt my dreams and fuel my revenge for the next 18 months. "Jesus Christ, Jessica. I thought I told you not to invite the charity case." Nathan Wright, my son-in-law of 7 years, stood in the doorway wearing a $3,000 suit that I happened to know he couldn't afford on his senior analyst salary. His perfectly coiffed hair and smugly handsome face radiated the kind of entitlement that made my blood pressure spike. "Nathan, please." Jessica's voice was strained, embarrassed. "She's my mother." "She's an embarrassment," Nathan shot back, loud enough for the other parents to hear.
"Look at her, Jess.
Thrift store clothes, bargain basement shoes. What are your colleagues going to think when they see that thing at our son's party?"
"Thing."
He called me a thing. I felt Camden tense in my arms, his 5-year-old mind processing the ugly words his father was spewing about his grandmother. The other parents, Nathan's co-workers and their wives, were starting to stare, their conversations dying as they sensed drama unfolding. "Nathan, that's enough," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. I could see it in her eyes, the shame she felt about her poor mother, the woman who had supposedly never amounted to anything. No, it's not enough. Nathan's voice grew louder, more vicious. I work 60 hours a week to provide this lifestyle for our family, and I'm not going to have some elderly welfare case bringing down the tone of my son's birthday party. The crowd was watching now, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. I recognized several faces. Nathan's colleagues from Meridian Financial, where he worked as a senior analyst. They had no idea they were watching him insult the woman who owned 47% of their company. "Get this thing away from here," Nathan continued, his voice dripping with disgust. "You are not our class, Bridget. You never have been, and you never will be. Camden doesn't need to be associated with whatever this is." He gestured at me dismissively, as if I were something he'd found stuck to his shoe. The other parents began murmuring among themselves, some pulling out phones to record what was clearly about to become a scene. "Daddy, don't be mean to Grandma," Camden said, his small voice barely audible over the crowd. "Camden, your grandmother needs to leave," Nathan said, his tone softening only slightly for his son. "She doesn't belong here with us." That's when Jessica made the choice that would seal all their fates. "Mom," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes, "maybe you should go. This isn't the right time." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My own daughter, the child I had raised, educated, and loved unconditionally, was choosing her husband's cruelty over her mother's dignity. "Jessica," I said quietly, "are you sure this is what you want?" She looked at Nathan, then at the crowd of his colleagues, then back at me.
"I'm sorry, Mom."
Maybe next time." Next time. As if there would be a next time after this public humiliation. I set Camden down gently, kissing the top of his head. "I love you, sweetheart. Don't ever forget that." "I love you too, Grandma," he whispered, tears beginning to form in his eyes. As I walked back down the driveway, I heard Nathan's voice behind me, addressing his audience like a performer who had just delivered his best monologue. "Sorry about that, folks. Some people just don't know their place in the world." The laughter that followed his comment was like gasoline on a fire that had been smoldering in my chest for years. But what Nathan Wright didn't know, what none of them knew, was that he had just declared war on the wrong woman. You see, I didn't just own 47% of Meridian Financial. I owned the other 53% through a network of shell companies and offshore accounts that had taken Charles and me 30 years to construct. Nathan Wright worked for me. They all worked for me. And on Monday morning, the real Bridget Barry was going to work. That night, as I sat in my penthouse overlooking Central Park, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to my head of security, a former CIA operative named Jackson Pierce who had been protecting my interests for over a decade. "Jackson," I said, "I need everything you can find on Nathan Wright. Financial records, communications, personal history, professional conduct. Everything." "How deep do you want me to go, Mrs. Barry?" "Deep enough to bury him." The second call was to my lawyer, Amanda Foster, who had been handling my legal affairs since Charles's death. "Amanda, I want to implement the Barry Protocol." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The Barry Protocol was something Charles and I had developed years ago, a systematic plan for exposing and destroying anyone who threatened our family. We had never used it, but Nathan Wright was about to become our first case study. "Are you sure, Bridget? Once we start this process, there's no going back." I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The third call was the most important. I dialed a number I hadn't used in over 5 years, a secure line that connected directly to Langley, Virginia. "Bridget Barry for Director Harrison," I said when the voice answered. "Mrs. Barry, it's been a long time," came the familiar voice of CIA Director Patricia Harrison, a woman who owed her career to information Charles and I had provided during our years as private intelligence contractors. "Patricia, I need a favor. A big one." "Name it." I need you to help me destroy someone who threatened my family. Consider it done." As I hung up the phone and poured myself a glass of 30-year-old scotch, I looked out at the city lights twinkling below. Nathan Wright had called me a thing, something to be discarded and forgotten. But things, I realized, don't plan revenge. And after 18 months of careful, methodical destruction, Nathan Wright would learn exactly what kind of monster he had awakened. But by then, it would be far too late for apologies, far too late for mercy, and far too late for anything except the kind of justice that only comes with a bullet. The birthday party was over. Now the real party was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only October in Manhattan could provide. I stood before my walk-in closet, selecting my armor for the day ahead. Gone were the thrift store cardigans and discount department store shoes Nathan had mocked. In their place, I chose a $4,000 Armani suit in charcoal gray, Louboutin heels that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the diamond necklace Charles had given me for our 25th anniversary. Today, Bridget Berry, CEO of Berry Industries, majority shareholder of Meridian Financial, and one of the most powerful women in American business, was going to work. Mrs. Berry, Nicole greeted me as I stepped off my private elevator into the executive suite of the Berry Industries Tower. Your 9 a.m. meeting with the Meridian Financial Board has been confirmed. Mr. Pierce's preliminary report is on your desk, and Director Harrison called to confirm your lunch meeting. I smiled, feeling the familiar rush of power that came with being in my element. Perfect. And Nicole? Clear my schedule for the rest of the week. I'm going to be very busy. Jackson Pierce was waiting in my office, a thick manila folder in his hands and a grim expression on his face. At 55, Jackson still carried himself with the lethal precision of his Special Forces days, though now his wars were fought with information instead of bullets. "Mrs. Berry," he said, standing as I entered, "I have the right report you requested. Seat, Jackson. And please, tell me you found something deliciously incriminating." Jackson's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, I found something all right. Multiple somethings. Nathan Wright isn't just an arrogant ass, he's a criminal." I settled into my leather chair, savoring the moment. "Tell me everything. Where do I start?" Jackson opened the folder, revealing photographs, bank statements, and documents I didn't recognize. Embezzlement, insider trading, tax evasion, and, my personal favorite, he's been selling proprietary Meridian financial information to competing firms for the past 18 months. 18 months, I repeated, the timeline not lost on me. Right around the time Charles died. "Gets better," Jackson continued. "The information he's been selling? It's been used to undercut Meridian's biggest clients, costing the company approximately $47 million in lost revenue." I felt a cold satisfaction spreading through my chest. Nathan Wright hadn't just humiliated me at my grandson's birthday party. He had been systematically stealing from me for over a year. "There's more," Jackson said, producing a series of photographs. "Nathan's been living well above his means. The house in Westchester? Bought with laundered money. The luxury cars? Financed through shell corporations. Even his son's private school tuition is being paid with stolen funds. And Jessica? Does she know?" Jackson's expression darkened. "That's where it gets complicated. Based on the communications I've intercepted, Jessica not only knows about the stolen money, she's been actively helping him launder it through her boutique interior design business." The betrayal cut deeper than I had expected. My daughter, the child I had sacrificed everything to raise properly, was not just complicit in her husband's criminal activities, she was an active participant. "Mrs. Berry," Jackson said gently, "there's something else. About your husband's death." My blood turned to ice. "What about it?" "I've been investigating the carjacking, following some leads that the police missed. Nathan Wright took out a $2 million life insurance policy on Charles 6 months before he died. He forged your signature as the beneficiary. The room spun around me. Charles hadn't been killed in a random carjacking. He had been murdered, and my son-in-law was the one who had ordered it.
How?
My voice was barely a whisper. The carjackers were hired muscle paid through the same network Nathan's been using for his other criminal activities. They made it look random, but Jackson pulled security footage from 3 blocks away. Nathan's car was following Charles's route that night. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. For 3 years, I had mourned my husband's senseless death, believing it was just another casualty of urban violence. Instead, it had been a calculated murder, orchestrated by the man who had just humiliated me in front of a crowd of strangers. Does he know who I am?
I asked.
No, Jackson said firmly. As far as Nathan Wright knows, you're exactly what you appeared to be, a poor widow struggling to get by. He has no idea that the woman he called a thing owns the company where he works and can destroy his entire world with a phone call. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, my mind racing with possibilities. Nathan Wright had murdered my husband, stolen from my company, corrupted my daughter, and humiliated me in front of my grandson. He thought he was untouchable, protected by his arrogance and the secret wealth he had stolen. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Jackson, I said, my voice steady and cold, I want you to coordinate with Director Harrison on the criminal aspects of this case. Nathan Wright is going to prison, but not before I destroy everything he holds dear. And Mrs. Barry? What about Jessica? I turned back to face him, my reflection in the window showing a woman transformed. Gone was the gentle grandmother who had been humiliated at a child's birthday party. In her place stood a billionaire CEO with the resources to wage war against anyone who threatened her family. Jessica made her choice when she told me to leave that party. Now she gets to live with the consequences. At 10 a.m. sharp, I walked into the boardroom of Meridian Financial, flanked by my legal team and Jackson Pierce. The board members, 12 men and women who had been running my company for years without knowing my true identity, looked confused and slightly alarmed at the emergency meeting that had been called. Ladies and gentlemen, Amanda Foster announced, I'd like you to meet the majority shareholder of Meridian Financial, Bridget Barry. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the recognition dawning on their faces as they realized that the sweet old woman some of them had seen around the office was actually their boss. Mrs. Barry, stammered Harold Chin, the company's president, we had no idea you were. That I was what, Harold? Poor? Insignificant? Not worth your respect. I took my seat at the head of the table, the position that had always been rightfully mine. I think it's time we had a conversation about employee conduct and corporate security. For the next hour, I methodically destroyed Nathan Wright's professional life. I presented evidence of his embezzlement, his insider trading, his theft of proprietary information. I showed them how his criminal activities had cost the company millions of dollars and put them all at legal risk. Effective immediately, I announced, Nathan Wright is terminated from Meridian Financial. He will also be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law for corporate espionage, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Mrs. Barry, ventured Patricia Goldman, the head of human resources, shouldn't we follow proper termination procedures? Give him a chance to respond to these allegations. I smiled, and several board members visibly shivered at the expression. Patricia, Nathan Wright called me a thing in front of my grandson and told me I wasn't fit to be in the same room as him. He murdered my husband and stole from my company for over a year. I think he's had enough chances, don't you? At 11:30 a.m., Nathan Wright was escorted from the Meridian Financial Building by security guards, his personal belongings in a cardboard box, his company credit cards canceled, his access to all systems revoked. I watched from my office window as he stood on the sidewalk, confused and humiliated, trying to call someone on his phone. He was calling Jessica I knew, his wife, my daughter, the woman who had chosen his cruelty over her mother's dignity. She would be getting some interesting news herself very soon. By noon, Nathan's bank accounts had been frozen by federal authorities. His house was being searched by FBI agents armed with warrants signed by a federal judge who owed Patricia Harrison several favors. His luxury cars were being repossessed, and his son's private school had been notified that tuition payments would cease immediately. And this was just the beginning. At 1 p.m., I met Director Harrison for lunch at Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. Patricia looked exactly as I remembered her, sharp, intelligent, and absolutely ruthless when necessary. "Bridget," she said, raising her glass of wine, "it's good to see you taking an active role in your business again." "It's good to have a reason to get back in the game," I replied. "Thank you for expediting the warrants. Charles was a good friend and a valuable asset. The least I can do is help you get justice for his murder." We spent the next hour discussing the finer points of Nathan's criminal activities and the federal case that would soon be built against him. By the time we finished our meal, Nathan Wright's fate was sealed.
But I wasn't finished with him yet.
Not by a long shot. That evening, as I sat in my penthouse reviewing the day's accomplishments, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica's number. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "Mom?" Jessica's voice was shaky, confused. "I've been trying to reach you all day. Something terrible has happened. Nathan was fired. The FBI searched our house. They froze our bank accounts. I don't understand what's happening." "Oh, darling," I said, examining my perfectly manicured nails, "I think you understand exactly what's happening. Your husband murdered your father and stole from his company. And you helped him." The silence on the other end was deafening. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. We never—" "Jessica," I interrupted, my voice turning ice cold, "Saturday afternoon, you chose Nathan's cruel behavior over your mother's dignity. You told me I didn't belong at my grandson's birthday party. Well, congratulations, sweetheart. You're about to learn what not belonging really feels like." I hung up the phone and poured myself another glass of scotch. Outside my window, Manhattan sparkled in the darkness, a city full of people who thought they understood power and money and influence. Nathan Wright had thought he was powerful. He had thought he was smarter than an old woman in thrift store clothes. He had thought he could murder my husband, steal my money, and humiliate me without consequences. Tomorrow, he would start learning how catastrophically wrong he had been. But today had been a good start. The morning news was delicious. I sat in my breakfast nook, sipping coffee from bone china, while watching Channel 7's coverage of the Meridian financial scandal unfold on my wall-mounted television. Senior analyst Nathan Wright was arrested early this morning on charges of embezzlement, insider trading, and conspiracy, the perfectly coiffed anchor announced. FBI sources confirm that Wright is suspected of stealing over $47 million from the investment firm over an 18-month period. The camera cut to footage of Nathan being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He still couldn't understand how his carefully constructed world had collapsed in less than 24 hours. "Mrs. Barry," Nicole's voice came through the intercom, "your 10 o'clock appointment with the private investigator is confirmed, and your daughter has called 17 times since midnight." "Thank you, Nicole. Please hold all calls from Jessica until further notice." I had work to do. Detective Ray Morrison looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for a grizzled private investigator: weathered face, cheap suit, and eyes that had seen too much. But his reputation for finding people who didn't want to be found was legendary, and I needed his particular set of skills. "Mrs. Barry," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "I understand you want me to locate some individuals?" "The men who killed my husband," I said simply. "I want names, addresses, and complete histories." Morrison nodded, making notes in a worn leather portfolio. I've reviewed the police reports and the evidence your security chief provided. This won't be easy. Professional killers tend to disappear after jobs like this. Detective Morrison, I'm prepared to spend whatever it takes and wait however long it takes. These men murdered the love of my life, and they're going to pay for it. Understood. What happens when I find them? I smiled, and Morrison's expression grew wary. That depends entirely on how cooperative they are. After Morrison left, I spent the morning reviewing financial reports and planning the next phase of Nathan's destruction. It wasn't enough to simply ruin him financially and professionally. I wanted him to understand the full scope of what he had done, the magnitude of his miscalculation. At noon, Jackson Pierce knocked on my office door. Mrs. Barry, we have a development. Jessica Wright is here to see you. Is she now? I checked my appearance in the mirror behind my desk, ensuring my makeup was perfect and my expression was appropriately cold. Send her in. My daughter looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her expensive clothes wrinkled, and her eyes were red from crying. She clutched her purse like a lifeline as she entered my office, looking around at the luxury with obvious confusion. Mom? Her voice was small, uncertain. I don't understand. This office, this building. How is this possible? Sit down, Jessica. She perched on the edge of the chair, her posture defensive. The FBI agents, they said Nathan worked for you. They said our house, our cars, everything we own belongs to you somehow. That can't be true. It's completely true, I said, leaning back in my chair. Your husband has been embezzling money from my company for over 18 months. The house you live in, the cars you drive, the private school Camden attends, all of it was purchased with money stolen from me. Your company? Jessica's voice cracked. Mom, you work at a library. You live in a tiny apartment. You wear clothes from Goodwill. I chose to live that way, I corrected. Your father and I decided long ago to keep our wealth private, to let our children build their own character without the corruption of easy money. Clearly, we failed with you. Jessica's face crumpled. Mom, please. I don't understand any of this. Nathan said there were some business opportunities, some investments that were paying off. I never knew he was stealing anything. Really? I opened the file Jackson had prepared, spreading financial documents across my desk. Because these bank records show that you've been depositing suspicious amounts of cash into your business account for over a year. This paperwork shows that you helped Nathan create shell companies to launder the stolen money. These emails show that you knew exactly where the money was coming from. Jessica stared at the evidence, her face growing pale. I thought Nathan was just really good at his job. He said he was getting bonuses, performance incentives. You knew, Jessica. You chose to know. Just like you chose Nathan's cruelty over your mother's dignity at Camden's birthday party. That's different. Nathan was he was stressed about work and he didn't want his colleagues to think. To think what? I stood up, my voice growing cold. That he was related to a poor person? That his mother-in-law wasn't good enough for his precious social circle? Jessica burst into tears.
Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about Saturday.
Nathan can be difficult sometimes, but he's not a bad person. He loves Camden, he loves me, and he's been providing for our family. With stolen money, I slammed my hand on the desk, causing Jessica to jump. Money stolen from me. And that's not even the worst part, Jessica. Your husband murdered your father. The color drained from Jessica's face completely.
What?
Nathan Wright hired the men who killed Charles. He took out a life insurance policy and arranged for your father's death to look like a random carjacking. No, Jessica whispered, shaking her head. No, that's impossible. Nathan loved Dad. He was devastated when Dad died. I turned my computer monitor toward her, showing the surveillance footage Jackson had uncovered. This is Nathan's car following your father's route on the night he was murdered. This is Nathan meeting with known criminals 3 days before the killing. This is Nathan collecting the insurance money 2 weeks after the funeral. Jessica stared at the screen, her face a mask of horror and disbelief. I can't, this isn't real. It's very real, sweetheart. Your husband is a murderer and a thief, and you've been helping him spend blood money for 3 years. Jessica broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. She was, after all, still my daughter. But then I remembered her face at Camden's party, the shame and embarrassment she had felt about her poor mother, and the sympathy evaporated. What happens now? Jessica asked through her tears. Now you face the consequences of your choices, I said simply. Nathan will go to prison for murder, embezzlement, and conspiracy. You will likely face charges as an accessory after the fact and for money laundering. Your house will be seized, your assets frozen, and your son will learn that everything he thought he knew about his family was a lie. Mom, please, Jessica begged. I'll do anything. I'll testify against Nathan. I'll pay back every penny. You'll what, Jessica? Leave another family gathering when your husband decides I'm not good enough to be there? She flinched as if I had slapped her. The time for apologies was Saturday afternoon. I continued. The time for making this right was 3 years ago, when you first suspected something was wrong. You made your choices, and now you live with them. What about Camden? Jessica's voice was desperate. He's innocent in all this. He's just a little boy. For the first time since she had entered my office, I felt my resolve waver. Camden was innocent. He was the victim in all of this, caught between his parents' crimes and his grandmother's revenge. Camden will be taken care of, I said carefully, but not by you or Nathan. You've proven that you can't be trusted with his welfare. Jessica's sobs grew louder. You can't take my son away from me. Please, Mom, he's all I have left. You should have thought about that before you chose a murderer over your mother. I pressed the intercom button. Jackson, please escort Mrs. Wright from the building. As security led my daughter away, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. Jessica had made her bed. Now she would lie in it. But destroying her brought me no joy, only the cold comfort of justice served. That evening, I received a call from Detective Morrison. Mrs. Barry, I found them. The 2 men who killed your husband. Are you ready to hear their names? I've been ready for 3 years. Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera. They're currently hiding in a warehouse in Queens, probably waiting for the heat from Nathan's arrest to die down before they disappear permanently. Good work, Detective. Please forward their location to Jackson Pierce. Mrs. Barry, what exactly do you plan to do with this information? I looked out at the city lights, thinking about Charles, about the life we had built together, about the future that had been stolen from us. I'm going to ask them some questions, I said. And, depending on their answers, they might live to see another sunrise. Ma'am, I have to advise against taking the law into your own. Detective Morrison, you've done excellent work. Consider our business concluded. I hung up the phone and called Jackson. It's time to pay some visits, I said. And Jackson? Bring your friends. The men who had murdered my husband were about to learn that some debts could only be paid in blood. The warehouse in Queens was exactly the kind of place where murders were planned and secrets were buried. Industrial, isolated, and forgotten by anyone who mattered. Perfect for what I had in mind. I arrived at midnight, flanked by Jackson Pierce and 3 of his associates, former military contractors who now handled special projects for Barry Industries. The men's names were irrelevant. Their skills were everything. Mrs. Barry, Jackson said quietly as we approached the building, I want to emphasize that once we cross this line, there's no going back. What you're contemplating could have serious legal consequences. Jackson, I replied, checking the pistol in my purse, a .38 special that Charles had taught me to use years ago. These men murder my husband for money. They destroyed my family for a paycheck. I've spent 50 years building an empire through legal means, and where did it get me? My husband is dead, my daughter is a criminal, and my grandson's father is a murderer. Understood. How do you want to handle this? I want them alive long enough to answer some questions. After that. I shrugged. We'll see how cooperative they are. Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera were exactly what I expected. Two-bit criminals who had stumbled into a murder-for-hire job and thought they were smarter than the system. They were sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey and playing cards when we entered the warehouse, clearly not expecting company. "Gentlemen," I announced, my voice echoing in the cavernous space, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Both men jumped up, reaching for weapons that Jackson's team had already confiscated during their silent approach. They stood frozen, hands in the air, eyes wide with the realization that their hideout had been compromised. "Who the hell are you?"
Luis demanded.
He was the larger of the two, with prison tattoos covering his arms and the kind of dead eyes that came from a lifetime of violence. "I'm Bridget Barry," I said, walking closer. Charles Barry was my husband. The recognition hit them like a physical blow. Vincent, the smaller and clearly less intelligent of the pair, actually took a step backward. "We don't know what you're talking about, lady," Luis said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" I reached into my purse and produced a photograph. Charles and me at our 35th wedding anniversary, smiling and happy, unaware that we had less than 2 years left together. "Let me refresh your memory. 3 years ago, you followed my husband's car from his office to the parking garage where you shot him 3 times in the chest and stole his wallet to make it look like a robbery." "Prove it," Luis said, but the defiance in his voice was weakening. I nodded to Jackson, who produced a tablet and began showing the men surveillance footage, financial records, and communication intercepts that tied them directly to Charles's murder. "This is Nathan Wright paying you $50,000 to kill my husband," I said, narrating the evidence. "This is you conducting surveillance on Charles for 2 weeks before the murder. This is you purchasing the untraceable gun that you used to shoot him." Vincent broke first. "Look, lady, it was just business, okay? Nothing personal. We needed the money, and some guy wanted your husband dead. It happens every day. Just business," I repeated, my voice deadly calm. "You murdered the love of my life for money, and you call it business." "Hey, we didn't know the guy," Luis said. "Wright told us he was some rich asshole who deserved what was coming to him. We just did the job and got paid." "Rich asshole," I mused. "Interesting." Charles Barry was one of the kindest, most generous men who ever lived. He built schools in underprivileged communities, funded scholarships for disadvantaged children, and donated millions to charity every year. But you're right about one thing, he was rich. Rich enough to be worth killing, apparently. The men exchanged glances, sensing that this conversation was heading somewhere they didn't want to go. "What do you want?" Vincent asked.
"Money? We can pay you back."
"We got some savings, some jobs lined up." "I want justice," I said simply. "For 3 years, I've mourned my husband's death believing it was a random crime. For 3 years, I've struggled with the senselessness of losing him to street violence. But it wasn't senseless, was it? It was calculated.
Planned.
Purchased. Look, Mrs.
Barry, right?"
Luis tried to sound reasonable. "We're real sorry about your husband. If we had known he was a good guy, maybe we would have thought twice about it." "Maybe?" I pulled the .38 from my purse, watching both men's faces pale in the dim warehouse lighting. "You would have maybe thought twice about murdering an innocent man?" "Please, lady, don't do anything crazy," Vincent pleaded. "We'll tell you everything." Wright approached us through a guy we know, said he needed his father-in-law taken out. Made it sound like the old man was abusing his daughter, or something. Nathan told you Charles was abusing Jessica? The lie was so audacious, so completely opposite to reality, that I actually laughed. My husband worshipped my daughter. He would have died to protect her. We didn't know, Luis said desperately. We just took the job. 50 grand to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. We figured the guy must have had it coming if his own son-in-law wanted him dead. Tell me everything, I said, keeping the gun steady. Every detail of how you planned it, how you executed it, what Nathan Wright told you. For the next hour, Luis and Vincent confessed to everything. They described following Charles for weeks, learning his routines, identifying the perfect location for the ambush. They detailed how Nathan had provided them with Charles's schedule, his usual routes, even the security codes for his car. But it was Vincent who provided the detail that made my blood run cold. Wright was real specific about one thing, Vincent said, his voice shaking. He said we had to make sure the old man suffered. Not just a quick kill. He wanted him to know he was dying, to have time to think about it. The warehouse fell silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing. Nathan hadn't just wanted Charles dead. He had wanted him to suffer. He wanted Charles to suffer. I repeated, my voice barely audible. Yeah, Luis confirmed. Said something about the old man never respecting him, never thinking he was good enough for his daughter. He wanted payback for years of being looked down on. The irony was devastating. Nathan had felt disrespected by Charles, had harbored resentment about being looked down on, and then he had turned around and done exactly the same thing to me. The cycle of perceived humiliation and actual violence that had destroyed my family. There's something else, Vincent said, clearly hoping that more information might save his life. Wright has been planning this for years. He showed us life insurance policies, bank account information, even blueprints of some big house he was planning to buy after the old man was dead. Our house, I said, understanding flooding through me. He was planning to buy the house where he humiliated me using money from Charles's murder. Jackson stepped forward. Mrs. Barry, we should go. This location isn't secure indefinitely. I looked at the two men who had murdered my husband, who had taken the most important person in my life away from me for money. They were pathetic, really. Small-time criminals who had stumbled into something bigger than they understood, motivated by greed and a complete absence of conscience. I want you to understand something, I said, raising the gun. My husband was murdered by cowards. You're cowards. Nathan Wright is a coward, and cowards deserve what cowards get. Please, Luis begged. We'll disappear. You'll never see us again. We'll leave the country, change our names, whatever you want. You're right, I said. You will disappear. The first shot took Luis in the chest, dropping him to the concrete floor. Vincent tried to run, but Jackson's men were faster. I walked over to where he cowered against a stack of shipping containers. Any last words? I asked. You're crazy, Vincent screamed. You're a crazy old bitch, and you're going to burn in hell for this. Probably, I agreed and pulled the trigger. The silence that followed was profound. After 3 years of grief, rage, and unanswered questions, the men who had murdered Charles were dead. It should have felt like closure, like justice served. Instead, I felt empty, satisfied but not fulfilled, vindicated but not healed. Jackson, I said, handing him the gun, make sure this gets disposed of properly. And make sure the bodies are never found. Understood. What about Nathan Wright? I looked around the warehouse, at the blood pooling on the concrete, at the final resting place of 2 killers who had thought they were untouchable. Nathan's punishment is just beginning, I said. But first, I want him to understand exactly what he's lost. I want him to know that the woman he called a thing is the one destroying his entire world. We left the warehouse as silently as we had arrived. By morning, Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera would be nothing more than missing persons, two criminals who had simply vanished into the urban night. The police would investigate half-heartedly and eventually file the case away with thousands of other unsolved disappearances. But Nathan Wright would know. When he was sitting in his prison cell, facing life without parole for murder and embezzlement, he would understand that his victims had fought back. He would realize that actions have consequences, that cruelty has a price, and that some debts can only be paid in blood. The drive back to Manhattan was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I had crossed a line tonight, had moved from victim to avenger, from prosecutor to executioner. There would be no going back from this moment, no return to the innocent woman who had been humiliated at her grandson's birthday party. But as I looked out at the city lights reflecting off the East River, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Charles's death. Peace. Not happiness, not joy, but the cold satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served by my own hand. Nathan Wright had called me a thing, had dismissed me as beneath his notice. But things don't plan revenge. Things don't build empires. Things don't hire killers or eliminate threats. Monsters do. And Nathan Wright was about to learn that he had awakened the wrong monster. Nathan Wright looked like hell. 6 months in federal prison had stripped away the arrogant facade he had worn at Camden's birthday party. His expensive haircut had grown out into an unkempt mess, his perfectly manicured hands were calloused from prison labor, and his once confident demeanor had been replaced by the hunted look of a man who knew he was trapped. I sat across from him in the visitor's room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville, separated by reinforced glass and connected by a phone that had probably carried 1,000 desperate conversations. Nathan's eyes widened when he saw me, not with recognition of my true identity, but with confusion about why his mother-in-law would visit him in prison. "Bridget." His voice was hoarse, uncertain. "What are you doing here?" I smiled, the expression as cold and sharp as winter morning. "I came to see how you're adjusting to your new accommodations. I hear federal prison can be quite challenging for white-collar criminals." Nathan's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Even in prison, even facing life without parole, he still felt entitled to respect from the woman he had publicly humiliated. "Look, I know you're angry about what happened at Camden's party," he said, leaning closer to the glass. "I was having a bad day, and I said some things I shouldn't have. But this isn't the time or place for family drama." "Family drama," I repeated, savoring the phrase. "Is that what you call murdering my husband and stealing from my company?" The color drained from Nathan's face. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, Nathan," I said, opening the folder I had brought with me. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you really believe you could kill Charles, steal $47 million, and humiliate me in front of my grandson without consequences?" I pressed a photograph against the glass, a surveillance image of Nathan meeting with Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera 3 days before Charles's murder. "Recognize your friends?" I asked. "They were very talkative before they died." Nathan's eyes went wide with terror. "Before they, what did you do?" "I did what you should have expected me to do," I said calmly. "I eliminated a threat to my family, the same way you eliminated Charles." "You're insane," Nathan whispered. "You murdered those men." "I executed them," I corrected. "The same way they executed my husband on your orders. An eye for an eye, Nathan. Isn't that how justice works?" Nathan looked around the visitor's room frantically, as if searching for guards or witnesses who might protect him from the woman he was beginning to realize he had catastrophically underestimated. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I'm Bridget Barry," I said, producing another document, the incorporation papers for Barry Industries, showing my name as founder and CEO. "I'm the majority shareholder of Meridian Financial, where you used to work. I'm worth approximately $2.3 billion, and I'm the woman you called a thing in front of my grandson." Nathan stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. That's impossible. You live in a tiny apartment. You work at a library. You shop at thrift stores. I chose to live that way, I explained patiently. Charles and I wanted our children to develop character without the corruption of inherited wealth. We thought poverty, or the appearance of poverty, would teach them humility, gratitude, and respect for others. But Jessica, she doesn't know? Jessica knows now. She also knows that every luxury she's enjoyed for the past 3 years was purchased with money stolen from me. Money you obtained by murdering her father. Nathan's face crumpled as the full scope of his situation became clear. The house, the cars, Camden School, all bought with blood money. All being seized by federal authorities as proceeds of crime. Your son is currently living with Jessica's sister while his mother faces charges as an accessory to murder. No, Nathan said desperately. Camden is innocent. He doesn't deserve this. You should have thought about Camden before you murdered his grandfather, I said coldly. You should have thought about him before you humiliated his grandmother at his birthday party. That was different. I was protecting my family's reputation. I couldn't have my colleagues thinking. Thinking what, Nathan? That you were related to a poor person? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. You murdered my husband because you resented his success, his wealth, his position in society. And then you had the audacity to look down on me for the very poverty you thought would make you rich. Nathan broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. I never meant for any of this to happen. The killing, the stealing, it all got out of control. It got out of control the moment you decided my husband's life was worth less than your greed, I said. But I didn't come here to listen to your apologies, Nathan. I came to tell you what happens next. He looked up at me with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. You're going to spend the rest of your life in this place, I continued. You're going to wake up every morning knowing that you destroyed your family for money that was never even yours. You're going to go to sleep every night knowing that your son will grow up believing his father is a monster. Please, Nathan begged. I'll do anything. I'll confess to everything. I'll pay back every penny. With what money, Nathan? Everything you own was stolen from me. You have nothing left to bargain with. Then what do you want from me? I stood up, preparing to leave. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You called me a thing, dismissed me as beneath your notice, and murdered my husband for his money. Now you get to spend the rest of your life knowing that the woman you humiliated owns the very air you breathe. Wait. Nathan pressed his hands against the glass. What about Camden? What happens to my son? I paused at the door, considering his question. Camden will be raised by people who understand that character matters more than class, that love matters more than money, and that family loyalty doesn't mean tolerating cruelty. You can't take him away from Jessica. She's his mother. Jessica made her choice when she chose your reputation over her mother's dignity. Now she faces the consequences. As I walked away, I could hear Nathan screaming my name, pounding on the glass, demanding answers that would never come. The sound followed me down the corridor and out into the parking lot, where Jackson was waiting with the car. How did it go? He asked as we drove away from the prison. Exactly as expected, I replied. Nathan Wright finally understands what he's up against. And Mrs. Barry? How do you feel? I considered the question as we headed back toward Manhattan. How did I feel? Charles was still dead. Jessica was still facing criminal charges. Camden was still traumatized by the destruction of his family. The men who had killed my husband were dead, but their deaths hadn't brought Charles back. I feel like the scales are finally balanced, I said. Nathan Wright took everything from me, my husband, my daughter, my grandson's innocence. Now I've taken everything from him. Is it enough? I looked out at the city's skyline growing larger in the distance, thinking about the empire I had built, the power I wielded, the resources at my disposal.
Not yet, I said.
But it's a start. That evening, I sat in my penthouse office reviewing financial reports and planning the next phase of my campaign. Nathan was neutralized. The killers were dead. But there were still loose ends to tie up. Jessica needed to face the full consequences of her choices, and Camden needed to be protected from the toxic legacy his parents had created. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Barry? This is Detective Sarah Chun with the NYPD. I'm calling about the disappearance of Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera. I kept my voice perfectly steady. I'm sorry, Detective, but I'm not familiar with those names. They were suspects in your husband's murder case. They disappeared from a warehouse in Queens last night, and there are some unusual circumstances surrounding their disappearance. How unusual? There are signs of a struggle, some blood evidence, but no bodies. It's as if they simply vanished. Perhaps they fled, I suggested. Career criminals often disappear when they sense the authorities closing in. Perhaps, Detective Chin agreed, but there was skepticism in her voice. Mrs. Barry, I have to ask, where were you last night between midnight and 3 a.m.? I was at home, Detective. Alone. Reading.
I see.
And I suppose you wouldn't know anything about a black sedan seen leaving the warehouse area around the time of their disappearance. I'm afraid I wouldn't know anything about that, I said calmly. Though I have to say, Detective, if these men really were involved in my husband's murder, the world is probably a safer place without them. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Barry, I want to be very clear about something. If you have any information about what happened to Moreno and Carrera, now is the time to share it. Vigilante justice might feel satisfying in the moment, but it has a way of destroying the people who pursue it. Detective Chen, I said, my voice taking on the tone I used in boardroom negotiations. I'm a 65-year-old widow who has spent the last 6 months learning that my husband was murdered and my daughter was complicit in stealing from my company. I assure you that my capacity for vigilante justice is extremely limited. Understood. But Mrs. Barry, if anything else unusual happens, if any more people connected to your husband's case disappear or turn up dead, I'll be looking very closely at everyone involved. Of course, Detective. I wouldn't expect anything less. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. Detective Chun was smart, thorough, and obviously suspicious about my involvement in the killer's disappearance. But being suspicious and being able to prove anything were two very different things. I had been careful. Jackson had been professional. The bodies would never be found, the evidence had been disposed of, and Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera had simply vanished into the urban night like thousands of other criminals before them. Nathan Wright would spend the rest of his life knowing that his co-conspirators were dead, knowing that I had the power and resources to reach anyone who threatened my family, knowing that the woman he had dismissed as a thing was capable of ending lives as easily as she had ended careers. The scales of justice were balancing, one calculated move at a time. The federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan was a temple to justice, its imposing columns and marble facade designed to intimidate those who stood before its bench seeking mercy they probably didn't deserve. I sat in the gallery watching my daughter's sentencing hearing, flanked by Jackson Pierce and my legal team, observing the final destruction of the family Nathan Wright had corrupted. Jessica looked nothing like the polished socialite who had been embarrassed by my presence at her son's birthday party. 8 months of legal proceedings, media scrutiny, and social ostracism had stripped away her confidence and left her looking older, smaller, defeated. She sat at the defendant's table in a conservative black suit, her hands folded, her shoulders slumped in resignation. Your Honor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams addressed Judge Rebecca Martinez, The defendant Jessica Wright knowingly participated in a money laundering operation that funneled over $47 million in stolen funds through her interior design business. She helped her husband purchase luxury items with the proceeds of murder and embezzlement, and she maintained this criminal lifestyle for over 3 years. Judge Martinez reviewed the sentencing memo, her expression grave. Mrs. Wright, you've pled guilty to conspiracy, money laundering, and accessory after the fact to murder. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything to say? Jessica stood slowly, her lawyer beside her for support. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Your Honor, I want to apologize to my family and to everyone I've hurt. I know that my actions were wrong, and I know that I destroyed my son's life and betrayed my mother's trust. I can't undo what I've done, but I want the court to know that I deeply regret my choices. Do you wish to address the impact your crimes have had on the victims? Judge Martinez asked. Jessica turned slightly, her eyes finding mine in the gallery. For a moment, I saw the little girl I had raised, the daughter I had loved unconditionally, the woman I had hoped would become someone better than this. Mom, she said, tears streaming down her face, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what Nathan did to Dad, and I'm sorry for choosing his cruelty over your dignity. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I love you. The words hung in the air between us, a lifetime of complicated emotions compressed into a moment of public accountability. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to remember the good times before Nathan's corruption had poisoned our family. But a larger part of me remembered standing on her driveway while she told me to leave, remembered her shame and embarrassment about her poor mother, remembered her choice to enable a murderer rather than protect her family. I said nothing. Judge Martinez continued the proceedings. Mrs. Wright, the court acknowledges your acceptance of responsibility and your cooperation with federal investigators. However, your crimes were serious, ongoing, and had devastating consequences for multiple victims. She paused, reviewing her notes. The court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $4.7 million, representing your share of the criminal proceeds. Jessica collapsed into her chair, the weight of the sentence hitting her like a physical blow. 8 years in prison meant Camden would be 13 when she was released, if she was released. 8 years meant missing his childhood, his formative years, the memories that mothers were supposed to treasure. As the court officers prepared to take Jessica into custody, she turned to me one last time. Please, she mouthed silently. Take care of Camden. I nodded slightly, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of my responsibility to my grandson. Whatever Jessica had done, whatever choices she had made, Camden was innocent. He deserved better than the toxic legacy his parents had created. After the sentencing, I met with Assistant U.S. Attorney Williams in her office to discuss the ongoing investigation into Nathan's crimes. Mrs. Berry, she said, I want to thank you for your cooperation throughout this process. Your willingness to provide evidence and testimony was crucial to securing these convictions. I did what needed to be done, I replied. Justice required it. There is one outstanding matter, Williams continued, her expression growing serious. The investigation into the disappearance of Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera. The FBI believes they may have been murdered, possibly in retaliation for your husband's killing. I see, I said carefully. And what does that have to do with me? Probably nothing, Williams said, but her tone suggested otherwise. But I wanted you to know that if any evidence surfaces connecting you or your associates to their disappearance, we would be obligated to pursue charges. Of course, I agreed. Though I have to say, Prosecutor Williams, if those men really were my husband's killers, I'm not particularly troubled by their disappearance. Williams studied my face, looking for tells or admissions that would never come. Mrs. Berry, I understand your desire for justice. But vigilante killings create more problems than they solve. I wouldn't know anything about vigilante killings, I said smoothly. I'm a businesswoman, not a criminal. That evening, I drove to Camden's new school, an exclusive private academy where he was boarding during his parents' legal troubles. At 8 years old, he was too young to fully understand why his world had collapsed, but old enough to know that his family was gone. Grandma. Camden ran to me across the dormitory common room, his face lighting up with the only genuine joy I had seen in months. Are you here to take me home? I'm here to visit, I said, kneeling down to his level. How are you doing, sweetheart? Are you making friends? Some, he said uncertainly. But I miss Mommy and Daddy. The other kids say their parents are in jail, but I don't understand why. I took his small hands in mine, choosing my words carefully. Camden, sometimes adults make very bad choices that hurt other people. When that happens, they have to face consequences for their actions. Did Mommy and Daddy hurt people? Yes, sweetheart. They did. Camden's eyes filled with tears. Did they hurt you? The question cut through me like a knife. Yes, Camden. They hurt me very much.
I'm sorry, Grandma.
I'm sorry they were mean to you. I pulled him into my arms, holding him close while he cried for parents who would never deserve his love and for a childhood that had been stolen by their greed. Camden, I said softly, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You're a good boy, and you're going to grow up to be a good man. But you need to understand that your parents' choices have consequences, and some of those consequences affect you too. What do you mean? I mean that you're going to live with me now. I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to make sure you never have to worry about money or safety or having someone who loves you. Camden pulled back to look at my face. Forever. Forever. That night, as I sat in my penthouse reviewing custody documents and trust fund arrangements, I reflected on the complete destruction of Nathan Wright's world. He was serving life without parole for murder and embezzlement. Jessica was beginning an 8-year prison sentence for her role in the conspiracy. The house they had bought with blood money was being sold to pay restitution. Their cars had been repossessed, their bank accounts emptied, their social circle destroyed. But most importantly, Camden was safe. He would grow up knowing the truth about his parents, understanding the difference between right and wrong, learning that character mattered more than class, and that cruelty always had consequences. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Nathan's prison number. Hello, Nathan, I answered. Bridget, please. His voice was desperate, broken. I know you hate me. I know I deserve everything that's happened to me, but please don't take Camden away from Jessica. She's his mother. Jessica chose her path, I said calmly. She chose your reputation over her mother's dignity, your money over her father's life, your lies over her family's truth. Now she faces the consequences. She's going to prison for 8 years because of my crimes. Isn't that punishment enough?
No, Nathan.
It's not. You see, when you call me a thing at Camden's birthday party, when you told me I wasn't her class, you weren't just insulting me. You were teaching my grandson that it was acceptable to treat people with cruelty and contempt. You were poisoning his mind with your toxic values. I never meant. You meant every word, I interrupted. And now Camden gets to grow up with someone who will teach him that love matters more than money, that character matters more than class, and that family loyalty doesn't mean enabling criminals. Please, just let me talk to him. Let me explain. Explain what, Nathan? That you murdered his grandfather for money? That you stole millions of dollars to buy him toys and trips? That you taught him to look down on people who weren't wealthy enough for your social circle? The line went quiet for a long moment. You've destroyed everything, Nathan finally said.
No, Nathan.
You destroyed everything. I just made sure everyone could see the wreckage. I hung up the phone and walked to the window overlooking Central Park. Somewhere in the city below, Detective Chen was probably still investigating the disappearance of Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera. Federal prosecutors were probably still building cases against other members of Nathan's criminal network. And in a boarding school dormitory, my grandson was probably lying awake wondering why his parents had abandoned him. But justice was being served, one destroyed life at a time. The man who had called me a thing was spending life in prison. The woman who had chosen his cruelty over her mother's dignity was facing 8 years behind bars. The killers who had murdered my husband for money were feeding the fish in some unnamed body of water. The scales were balanced, but my work wasn't finished. There were still people who had enabled Nathan's crimes, still institutions that had failed to protect victims like Charles, still systems that needed to be reformed or destroyed. Nathan Wright had awakened something in me that day at Camden's birthday party, something cold and calculating and absolutely relentless. He had turned me from a victim into a predator, from a grandmother into an avenging angel. And I was just getting started. 6 months after Jessica's sentencing, I stood before the board of directors of Meridian Financial, preparing to announce the most comprehensive restructuring in the company's history. The same executives who had unknowingly enabled Nathan's crimes were about to learn that their failures had consequences as devastating as his. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had just spent 18 months systematically destroying everyone who had threatened her family. We need to discuss the future of this company. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They had all read the FBI reports, seen the media coverage of Nathan's crimes, and understood that their oversight failures had cost the company nearly $50 million. But they still didn't fully grasp that the sweet old woman some of them remembered from office visits was actually their judge, jury, and potential executioner. Mrs. Barry, ventured Harold Chen, the company president, we want you to know that we've implemented new security protocols and oversight procedures to prevent anything like the Wright situation from happening again. Have you, Harold? I opened the folder in front of me, spreading financial documents across the conference table. Because according to my independent audit, Nathan Wright wasn't the only employee stealing from this company. The color drained from Harold's face. I don't understand. Of course you don't. You've been too busy embezzling funds through your wife's consulting firm to notice that 3 other senior executives were running similar schemes. I turned to Patricia Goldman, the head of human resources. Patricia, you've been accepting kickbacks from staffing agencies for inflating contractor rates. Approximately $2.4 million over the past 5 years. Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Michael Torres, I continued, addressing the chief financial officer, you've been manipulating expense reports and creating false vendor accounts to funnel money into your personal investment portfolio. Roughly $3.8 million. Mrs. Barry, Michael stammered, there must be some mistake. There's no mistake, I interrupted. And Rebecca Walsh, I turned to the head of operations, you've been selling confidential client information to competitor firms. The damage to our business relationships is incalculable. The room fell silent except for the sound of expensive briefcases being nervously opened and closed. These executives had thought they were untouchable, protected by their positions and their supposed respectability. They were about to learn how catastrophically wrong they had been. Now, I continued, you're all wondering how I discovered these activities and, more importantly, what I intend to do about them. I pressed a button on the conference room's AV system, and the wall-mounted screens lit up with surveillance footage, financial records, and recorded phone conversations. For the past 6 months, while you've all been expressing your shock and dismay about Nathan Wright's crimes, I've been conducting a comprehensive investigation into every aspect of this company's operations. What I found was systematic corruption at nearly every level of management. Harold Chen tried to maintain his composure. Mrs. Barry, even if these allegations were true, Surely we can work something out. Repayment plans, enhanced oversight, whatever you think is appropriate. Harold, I said, my voice taking on the tone that had once made hostile takeover targets surrender without a fight. 6 months ago, my son-in-law stood in front of his colleagues. Some of you were there and called me a thing. He said I wasn't your class, that I didn't belong in civilized society. Do you remember that? Several board members nodded uncomfortably. What Nathan didn't know, what none of you knew, is that I've been your boss for over 20 years. This company, this building, your salaries, your stock options, your pension plans, everything you have professionally exists because I allow it to exist. I stood up, walking to the windows that overlooked Manhattan's financial district. Nathan Wright murdered my husband and stole from my company, but he couldn't have done it without your help. Your lack of oversight, your failure to implement proper security measures, your willingness to look the other way when the numbers didn't add up, all of you are complicit in his crimes. Mrs. Barry, Rebecca Walsh spoke for the first time. We had no idea about Charles's murder. If you had known, you would have done exactly what you did when you suspected financial irregularities. Nothing. Because addressing problems requires courage, and courage is something none of you possess. I returned to my seat, opening another folder filled with termination letters and legal documents. Effective immediately, all 4 of you are terminated from Meridian Financial. Your access to company systems has been revoked, your company credit cards have been canceled, and your pension benefits have been forfeited. You can't do this, Michael Torres said desperately. We have contracts, employment agreements, legal protections. Read the fine print, Michael. All employment contracts contain clauses regarding criminal activity and breach of fiduciary duty. You've violated both. Patricia Goldman finally found her voice. Mrs. Barry, I have 3 children and a mortgage. If you destroy my career over some minor bookkeeping irregularities. Minor? I laughed, the sound sharp and cold. Patricia, you stole nearly $2.5 million from a company that trusted you with its human resources. That's not minor. That's criminal. I pressed the intercom button. Security, please escort these 4 individuals from the building. They are no longer employees of Meridian Financial. As security guards entered the conference room, Harold Chun made one last desperate attempt to maintain his position. Mrs. Barry, without senior management, this company will collapse. Our clients will lose confidence. Our stock price will plummet. The media will have a field day. Harold, I said, watching security collect his company laptop and access cards, this company survived 30 years of growth and expansion with me as its leader. I think it can survive the removal of 4 thieves. After the terminated executives were escorted from the building, I called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. Over 200 employees gathered, their faces showing mixtures of confusion, concern, and curiosity about what had just happened to their senior management. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my name is Bridget Barry, and I am the founder and majority owner of Meridian Financial. The murmur that went through the crowd was audible. Many of these people had seen me around the office over the years, had probably assumed I was someone's grandmother or a client services representative. This morning, I terminated 4 senior executives for embezzlement, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. The total amount stolen from this company over the past 5 years exceeds $10 million. Several employees gasped. Others pulled out phones to check the company's stock price, which was already beginning to fluctuate based on early news reports. However, I continued, I want to assure all of you that your jobs are secure. The criminal activities of senior management do not reflect on the honest work that most of you perform every day. A hand went up in the back of the room. Mrs. Barry, what happens now? Who's going to run the company? I am, I said simply. Effective immediately, I'm resuming active management of Meridian Financial. We're going to rebuild this company with a focus on integrity, transparency, and the kind of ethical leadership that should have prevented these crimes in the first place. Another employee raised her hand. What about the Nathan Wright situation? How do we know this won't happen again? Excellent question, I replied. Nathan Wright was able to steal $47 million because senior management failed to implement proper oversight and security measures. Under my direct leadership, we're implementing new protocols that will make such theft impossible. I gestured to Jackson Pierce, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room. This is Jackson Pierce, former CIA operative and current head of corporate security. He will be working with each department to identify vulnerabilities and strengthen our defenses against both external threats and internal corruption. The meeting continued for another hour, with employees asking questions about job security, company direction, and the media attention that was sure to follow. By the time it ended, I was confident that Meridian Financial would not only survive the scandal, but emerge stronger than ever. That afternoon, I sat in my office reviewing resumes for the 4 executive positions I needed to fill. The candidates would be thoroughly vetted, their backgrounds investigated, their integrity verified. Never again would Meridian Financial be vulnerable to the kind of internal corruption that had enabled Nathan's crimes. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I recognized, Detective Sarah Chun from the NYPD. Mrs. Barry, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, Detective. How can I help you? I'm calling about the Moreno and Carrera case. We've had a development. I kept my voice carefully neutral. What kind of development? A witness came forward claiming to have seen 2 men matching their description getting into a black sedan near the warehouse on the night they disappeared. The witness provided a partial license plate number. I see. And what did that lead to? Dead end, unfortunately. The partial plate led to 17 possible vehicles, none of which have any connection to the missing men or to your husband's case. That's disappointing, I said, meaning the opposite. Mrs. Barry, I want to ask you again, do you have any knowledge of what might have happened to these men? Detective Chun, I've told you everything I know. If Moreno and Carrera really were involved in my husband's murder, I hope justice finds them eventually. But I don't know where they are or what happened to them. I understand. But Mrs. Barry, I want you to be very careful. If you, or anyone acting on your behalf, has taken justice into your own hands, it will eventually catch up with you. I appreciate your concern, Detective, but I'm a businesswoman, not a vigilante. After I hung up, I allowed myself a small smile. Detective Chun was thorough, dedicated, and obviously suspicious about my involvement in the killer's disappearance. But suspicion without evidence was just speculation, and I had been very careful to ensure that no evidence would ever surface. That evening, I drove to Camden's boarding school for our weekly dinner. At 8 years old, my grandson was adjusting well to his new life, though he still asked difficult questions about his parents and why they couldn't come home. Grandma, he said over dessert, some of the kids at school say their parents read about Daddy in the newspaper. They say he's a bad man. I chose my words carefully. Camden, your father made some very bad choices that hurt a lot of people. Sometimes when adults do bad things, it gets reported in the news. But why did he do bad things? Didn't he love me and Mommy? The question broke my heart. I think your father loved you very much, sweetheart. But sometimes people make terrible decisions because they want things they can't have, or because they're angry about things that happened to them. Were you one of the people Daddy hurt? I studied Camden's face, seeing Charles's eyes and Jessica's stubborn chin, wondering how much truth an 8-year-old could handle. Yes, Camden. Your father hurt me very badly. He hurt your grandfather too, before you were born. Is that why Grandpa Charles died? The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I had expected. Camden deserved honesty, even if it was painful. Yes, sweetheart. Your father arranged for some bad men to hurt your grandfather, and your grandfather died because of it." Camden's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy killed Grandpa Charles?" "Your father hired other people to do it, but yes. He's responsible for your grandfather's death." Camden cried then, mourning the loss of the father he thought he knew and the grandfather he had never met. I held him while he sobbed, feeling the weight of the truth that would shape the rest of his childhood. "Grandma," he said when he could speak again, "are you going to send me away because of what Daddy did?" "Never," I said firmly. "You are not responsible for your father's choices. You're my grandson, and I love you, and nothing will ever change that. Promise." "I promise." As I drove back to Manhattan that night, I reflected on the systematic destruction I had orchestrated over the past 18 months. Nathan Wright was serving life in prison. Jessica was 3 months into an 8-year sentence. The executives who had enabled their crimes were facing criminal charges and professional ruin. The killers who had murdered Charles were dead. But the cost had been enormous. My family was destroyed, my grandson was traumatized, and I had blood on my hands that would never wash clean. I had transformed from victim to executioner, from grandmother to monster, from someone who believed in legal justice to someone who dispensed the ultimate penalty. The city lights blurred past my window as I considered whether the revenge had been worth the price. Nathan Wright would spend the rest of his life knowing that the woman he had called a thing had systematically destroyed everything he held dear. He would know that his cruelty had consequences, that his arrogance had costs, that his crimes had been answered with justice both legal and personal. But I would spend the rest of my life knowing that I had killed 2 men in cold blood, that I had chosen vengeance over mercy, that I had let hatred consume whatever goodness Charles had seen in me. The scales were balanced, but the weight of what I had done would never leave me. Nathan Wright had called me a thing, had dismissed me as beneath his notice. But in destroying him, I had become something far worse than anything he could have imagined. I had become exactly what monsters like him deserved. The media feeding frenzy began 3 days after I terminated the Meridian financial executives. By Thursday morning, my face was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal under the headline, "The Billionaire Grandmother's Revenge," and every major news network was running stories about the Meridian financial scandal and my role in exposing it. I sat in my penthouse office watching CNN's coverage while Nicole fielded calls from reporters, book agents, and documentary filmmakers who wanted to tell my story. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same media that would have ignored Nathan's poor mother-in-law were now fascinated by the billionaire CEO who had destroyed her family's tormentors. "Mrs. Barry," Nicole announced through the intercom, "Anderson Cooper's producer is on line 3. 60 Minutes is requesting an exclusive interview, and someone from Netflix wants to discuss a limited series about your story." "Tell them all the same thing," I replied. "I'm not interested in publicity. This isn't entertainment, it's justice." But even as I refused interviews, the story continued to grow. Financial journalists were digging into Meridian's corporate structure, discovering the complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts that Charles and I had used to maintain our privacy. Crime reporters were investigating Nathan's murder conviction and the mysterious disappearance of his co-conspirators. Society columnists were breathlessly recounting the birthday party confrontation that had started it all. The narrative that emerged was both accurate and incomplete. Yes, I was a billionaire who had hidden her wealth from her family. Yes, I had systematically destroyed everyone who had threatened or betrayed me. But the media coverage focused on the David and Goliath aspect of the story, the underestimated grandmother who had brought down powerful criminals, while missing the darker truth about what I had become in the process. "Mrs. Barry," Jackson Pierce entered my office carrying a tablet loaded with news articles. "We have a problem. Someone leaked details about your husband's murder investigation to the press." He showed me the headline from the New York Post. "Murder for hire. How Greedy's son-in-law orchestrated billionaire's death. The article contained information that hadn't been released publicly, details about Nathan's insurance policies, the surveillance footage of him meeting with the killers, even quotes from Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera's confessions. Someone with access to the investigation had provided the media with a comprehensive account of Charles's murder.
Who leaked this?
I asked. Unknown. Could be someone in the FBI, the prosecutor's office, or even the prison system. But Mrs. Barry, there's something else. The article mentions that Moreno and Carrera have disappeared and are presumed dead. I read the relevant section carefully. Law enforcement sources confirm that the two men suspected of carrying out the contract killing have vanished without a trace. Their disappearance has sparked speculation about vigilante justice and the possibility that someone connected to the victims sought personal revenge. How much do they know? I asked. Nothing definitive. But the reporter is asking the right questions, and she's got sources inside the investigation. What's her name? Jackson checked his notes. Jennifer Walsh, investigative reporter for The Post. Former crime beat reporter, won a Pulitzer for exposing police corruption. She's thorough, persistent, and apparently very good at getting people to talk. I made a mental note to have Jennifer Walsh's background investigated. Reporters who asked too many questions about disappeared killers could become problems that needed to be managed. That afternoon, I attended Camden's school play, a production of Peter Pan where my grandson played one of the lost boys. Watching him on stage, innocent and happy despite everything his parents had done, reminded me why I had started this war in the first place. Nathan Wright had threatened my family, and families were worth protecting at any cost. Grandma. Camden ran to me after the performance, still wearing his costume. Did you see me? I remembered all my lines. You were wonderful, sweetheart, I said, hugging him close. I'm so proud of you. Are you coming to the cast party? I wouldn't miss it. As we walked toward the school's reception hall, I noticed several other parents pointing and whispering. Some looked at me with curiosity, others with something approaching fear. Word had spread through the private school community about who I really was and what I had done to my family's enemies. Mrs. Barry? A woman approached me hesitantly. I'm Susan Mitchell, Camden's teacher. I wanted to thank you for everything you've done for him. He's such a brave little boy, and he speaks about you with such love. Camden is a special child, I replied. He deserves all the support and stability we can provide. If you don't mind me saying, Susan continued, lowering her voice, I think what you did, exposing those criminals, protecting your family, was incredibly brave. Too many people would have just accepted the injustice. Sometimes accepting injustice isn't an option, I said. After the cast party, I drove Camden back to his dormitory, listening to him chatter excitedly about the play and his friends and his plans for the weekend. For a few hours, I could almost forget about the media circus surrounding my story and focus on what really mattered, protecting the innocent child who had suffered most from his parents' crimes. Grandma, Camden said as I tucked him into bed, why do people keep taking your picture and asking you questions? Because they're interested in what happened to our family, I explained. Sometimes when unusual things happen, reporters want to tell everyone about it. Are you famous now? I suppose I am, in a way. Is it fun being famous? I considered the question carefully. Fame wasn't fun, it was dangerous. The more attention I received, the more likely it became that someone would start asking questions about Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera's disappearance. But Camden needed to understand that our lives had changed, that privacy was now a luxury we might not be able to afford. Being famous can be complicated, sweetheart. It means people pay attention to everything you do, even things that should be private. Will the reporters leave us alone eventually? I hope so. But Camden, even if they don't, I want you to remember that none of this changes who you are or how much I love you. That night, I returned to my penthouse to find Nicole waiting with a stack of message slips and a concerned expression. Mrs. Barry, we've had over 300 media requests today. The phone hasn't stopped ringing, and there are photographers camped outside the building. Any threats? None directed at you specifically, but there have been some concerning messages. People defending Nathan Wright, claiming you've ruined an innocent man. Others criticizing your methods, saying you should have let the legal system handle everything.
I wasn't surprised.
Nathan had been handsome, charming, and successful. The kind of man who inspired loyalty even after his crimes were exposed. There would always be people who believed his victims were somehow responsible for his downfall. What about security? Jackson's team has increased patrols around the building and Camden School. We're also monitoring social media for any direct threats or concerning activity.
Good.
And Nicole? I want you to compile a list of everyone who's requested interviews or information about my story. I need to know who's digging into what aspects of this case. Already done, Nicole said, handing me a thick folder. The most persistent reporters are focusing on the financial crimes and your business empire. But there are a few who seem more interested in your husband's murder and what happened to his killers. I flipped through the list, noting names and publications, identifying potential threats to my carefully constructed narrative. Most of the reporters were interested in the human interest angle, the billionaire grandmother who had hidden her wealth and then used it to destroy her family's enemies. But a few were asking harder questions about vigilante justice and the convenient disappearance of the men who had murdered Charles. Mrs. Barry, Nicole said carefully, there's something else. Jennifer Walsh from the Post called, personally. She says she has information about your husband's case that she'd like to discuss with you privately. What kind of information? She wouldn't say over the phone, but she seemed to think it was something you'd want to know before she publishes her next article. I considered the implications. Jennifer Walsh was clearly investigating Charles's murder and the subsequent disappearance of his killers. She might have uncovered evidence that could link me to their deaths, or she might be fishing for information to confirm her suspicions. Either way, she represented a potential threat to everything I had accomplished. Schedule a meeting, I said finally, but make it clear that I'm not interested in giving her an interview. If she has information relevant to my husband's case, I'll listen. But this isn't a publicity opportunity. Understood. When would you like to meet with her? Tomorrow. And Nicole? Make sure Jackson is there. If Ms. Walsh knows something she shouldn't, I want to know exactly what we're dealing with. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on how quickly my private war had become public entertainment. The media was fascinated by my transformation from invisible grandmother to avenging billionaire, but they were missing the most important part of the story, the cost of that transformation. Nathan Wright had called me a thing, had dismissed me as beneath his notice, had murdered my husband and corrupted my daughter. In response, I had become something far more dangerous than he could have imagined, a woman with unlimited resources and absolutely nothing left to lose. But in becoming that woman, I had also become someone Charles might not have recognized, someone who solved problems with bullets instead of lawyers, someone who chose vengeance over mercy. The media could speculate about my motives and methods all they wanted. They could turn my story into entertainment, inspiration, or cautionary tale. But they would never understand the real price of justice, the true cost of becoming a monster to defeat monsters. Some truths were too dark for prime-time television. Jennifer Walsh looked exactly like what Central Casting would order for an investigative reporter: sharp suit, intelligent eyes, and the kind of determined expression that suggested she didn't give up easily. She sat across from me in my office conference room, a digital recorder between us, and a manila folder that probably contained more information than I wanted her to have. Mrs. Barry, she began, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I know you've been declining most interview requests. This isn't an interview, Ms. Walsh. I corrected. You said you had information about my husband's case. I'm here to listen, not to be interrogated. Understood. Walsh opened her folder, revealing photographs and documents I didn't recognize. I've been investigating your husband's murder for the past 3 months, focusing particularly on what happened to Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera. I kept my expression neutral. And what have you discovered? That they were both killed execution style in a Queens warehouse 6 months ago. Their bodies were disposed of so thoroughly that the police will probably never find them. My blood ran cold, but I maintained my composure. That's a serious allegation, Ms. Walsh. Do you have evidence to support it? I have sources inside the NYPD who confirmed that blood evidence at the warehouse matched both men's DNA. I also have a witness who saw a black sedan leaving the area around the time of their disappearance. Walsh produced a photograph, grainy security footage, showing a dark vehicle in the distance. The partial license plate led to 17 possible vehicles, but I've been able to narrow it down considerably. She slid another document across the table. One of those vehicles is registered to a company called Pierce Security Solutions. Ring any bells? Jackson Pierce, who had been standing quietly by the window, turned toward us. Walsh smiled at his reaction. Mr. Pierce, I presume? Former CIA operative, current head of security for Berry Industries, and owner of the vehicle that was seen leaving the scene where 2 murder suspects were killed. Ms. Walsh, I said carefully, you seem to be suggesting that Mr. Pierce and I were involved in some kind of vigilante killing. That's a very serious accusation. I'm not suggesting anything, Mrs. Berry.
I'm stating facts.
Your husband was murdered by 2 men who have since disappeared. You have the resources and connections to make people disappear. And your head of security was driving a vehicle seen leaving their last known location. Walsh leaned forward, her voice taking on the tone of someone who knew she held all the cards. But here's what really interests me. I don't think you're a monster, Mrs. Berry. I think you're a woman who was pushed too far by people who underestimated her. Your son-in-law murdered your husband, stole your money, and humiliated you in front of your grandson. The legal system gave him life in prison, but that wasn't enough, was it? Ms. Walsh, I'm not sure what response you're expecting from me.
I'm expecting honesty, Walsh replied.
Because, Mrs. Berry, I don't think Moreno and Carrera were your only victims. She produced another photograph, this one showing a man I didn't recognize lying in what appeared to be a hospital bed. Do you know James Patterson, Mrs. Berry? I studied the photo carefully. I'm not familiar with that name. He was one of Nathan Wright's criminal associates, part of the network that helped launder stolen money through offshore accounts. 3 weeks ago, someone broke into his apartment and injected him with a drug that's left him in a permanent vegetative state. My expression didn't change, but internally I was reassessing everything I thought I knew about this meeting. Jackson and I had eliminated Moreno and Carrera, but we hadn't touched anyone else connected to Nathan's network. Mr. Patterson's condition is irreversible, Walsh continued. He'll spend the rest of his life as a breathing corpse, unable to speak, move, or care for himself. The drug used was untraceable, professional grade, the kind of thing that requires serious connections to obtain. What does this have to do with me? Patterson was one of 5 people who helped Nathan Wright launder money from your company. In the past 4 months, 2 have died in apparent accidents, 1 has disappeared completely, and now Patterson is brain dead. That leaves just 1 member of the network still alive and functional. Walsh placed a final photograph on the table, a surveillance image of a middle-aged woman entering an upscale restaurant.
Dr.
Amanda Foster, the lawyer who helped Nathan create the shell companies used to hide stolen assets. She's also the last person alive who can testify about the full scope of the criminal network. Ms. Walsh, I said, my voice growing cold, if you're suggesting that I've been systematically murdering people connected to my husband's case, you're mistaken. I'm a businesswoman, not a serial killer. Are you Mrs. Barry? Because my sources tell me that Dr. Foster has been receiving death threats for the past month. Anonymous calls warning her to keep quiet about Nathan Wright's associates, suggesting that talking to investigators might be hazardous to her health. I exchanged a glance with Jackson, who looked as confused as I felt. Someone else was killing members of Nathan's network, someone with access to professional-grade drugs and the ability to make deaths look accidental. Ms. Walsh, I said carefully, I think there may be more to this story than either of us realized. What do you mean? I mean that if someone is systematically eliminating Nathan Wright's criminal associates, it isn't me. I dealt with the men who killed my husband, but I haven't touched anyone else. Walsh's expression shifted from confident to concerned. You're saying someone else is cleaning up the network? I'm saying that Nathan Wright may have had enemies beyond the families he victimized. Someone with the resources and motivation to ensure that his associates couldn't testify about the full scope of their criminal activities. Who would have that kind of reach? Before I could answer, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in over a year, CIA Director Patricia Harrison. Excuse me, I said to Walsh, answering the call. Patricia? Bridget, we need to talk. Immediately. There's been a development in the Wright case that affects national security. What kind of development? The kind that can't be discussed over the phone. How quickly can you get to Langley? I looked at Jennifer Walsh, who was obviously listening to every word she could hear. I can be there in 3 hours. Good. And Bridget? Bring your security chief. This involves him too. After I hung up, Walsh leaned back in her chair, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. The CIA is involved in this case? Ms. Walsh, I think our meeting is over. Wait, she said desperately. If there's a national security angle to this story, the public has a right to know. Whatever Nathan Wright was involved in, whatever this network was really doing. Some things are more important than your story, I interrupted. If Director Harrison is calling me to Langley, it means there are aspects of this case that go far beyond family revenge. I stood up, Jackson moving to escort Walsh from the building. Mrs. Barry, Walsh called out as security approached, I'm going to keep investigating this story. With or without your cooperation. That's your choice, Ms. Walsh. But be very careful about what you publish. Some secrets are classified for good reasons. As Walsh was escorted out, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. If the CIA was involved in Nathan's case, it meant the criminal network was far more extensive than I had realized. It meant that my personal war of revenge had intersected with something much larger and more dangerous. 3 hours later, Jackson and I sat in a secure conference room at CIA headquarters, facing Patricia Harrison and 2 other officials I didn't recognize. Bridget, Patricia began, we have a problem. Nathan Wright's criminal network wasn't just stealing money from American companies. They were selling classified defense contractor information to foreign governments.
What?
Wright's contacts at various firms were providing him with proprietary technology data, weapons specifications, even troop movement information. He was selling it through intermediaries to Chinese and Russian intelligence services. The scope of Nathan's crimes was staggering. He hadn't just murdered my husband and stolen from my company. He had been committing treason. How long has this been going on? I asked. At least 5 years. We've been tracking the intelligence leaks for months, trying to identify the source. Wright's arrest finally gave us the break we needed to understand the network structure. Patricia slid a folder across the table. These are the names of everyone involved in the espionage ring. Some of them are already dead. I opened the folder and saw the photographs Walsh had shown me, James Patterson, Dr. Amanda Foster, and several others I didn't recognize. Who's killing them? We are, said one of the other officials, a stern-looking man who hadn't been introduced. This is a matter of national security. We can't allow these traitors to continue operating or to provide testimony that might expose our counterintelligence operations. You're assassinating American citizens, I said, the reality of the situation hitting me. We're protecting classified information and ongoing operations, the man corrected. These people committed treason. The penalty for treason is death. Patricia leaned forward. Bridget, we need your help. You have connections to the remaining network members through your investigation of rights crimes. We need you to help us identify everyone involved so we can neutralize the threat. And if I refuse? Then you become a security risk yourself, the unnamed official said coldly. You know too much about our operations to walk away. I looked at Jackson, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We were trapped, caught between our own crimes and the government's need for secrecy. What do you need me to do? Help us find Dr. Amanda Foster, Patricia said. She's gone underground since Patterson's incident, but she's the key to understanding the full scope of the intelligence operation. Once we have her, we can roll up the rest of the network. As we left Langley that evening, I realized that my war of personal revenge had evolved into something far more complex and dangerous. Nathan Wright's crimes had national security implications. His associates were being systematically eliminated by government assassins, and I was now an unwilling participant in a cleanup operation that could expose my own criminal activities. The man who had called me a thing had been involved in treason against the United States. The network I had been investigating for personal reasons was actually an espionage ring that threatened national security. And somewhere in the shadows, Dr. Amanda Foster was running for her life, carrying secrets that could either save her or ensure her death. The game had changed completely. What had started as a grandmother's revenge was now a matter of national security, and I was no longer sure which side I was supposed to be on. 2 years later, the sun was setting over Manhattan as I stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Barry Memorial Tower, a 70-story monument to my husband's memory and my own transformation from victim to victor. The building housed the headquarters of my expanded empire, Barry Industries, Meridian Financial, and the dozen other companies I had acquired during my systematic destruction of everyone who had crossed my family. Mrs. Barry, Nicole's voice came through my earpiece. The board meeting is ready to begin whenever you are. I'll be right there, I replied, taking one last look at the city sprawling below me. Somewhere out there, Nathan Wright was beginning his 3rd year in federal prison, Jessica was midway through her 8-year sentence, and Camden was thriving in his new life under my protection. The boardroom of Barry Memorial Tower was a temple to power, floor-to-ceiling windows, a conference table made from a single piece of Brazilian rosewood, and portraits of Charles and me from our early days building the company. 15 executives sat around the table, all of them handpicked by me, all of them understanding that their positions depended on absolute loyalty and unwavering competence. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. 2 years ago, this company was nearly destroyed by criminal activity and management failures. Today, we're reporting record profits and have become the most respected financial services firm on the East Coast. The numbers spoke for themselves. Meridian Financial had not only recovered from the Nathan Wright scandal, but had emerged stronger than ever. Our client base had tripled, our assets under management had increased by 400%, and our reputation for integrity and security was unmatched in the industry. More importantly, I continued, we've used our success to protect other families from the kind of betrayal and victimization that nearly destroyed mine. Over the past 2 years, I had quietly funded investigations into elder abuse, corporate fraud, and family financial exploitation. 3 criminal networks had been exposed and dismantled. 17 elderly victims had recovered stolen assets totaling over $200 million. And 5 families had received the kind of justice that the traditional legal system couldn't provide. Mrs. Barry asked Patricia Goldman's replacement, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel Torres, the media is still asking questions about your role in the Wright investigation. How do we handle ongoing press inquiries? We handle them by pointing to our results, I replied. Nathan Wright was a criminal who murdered my husband and stole from our clients. He's in prison where he belongs, and our company is stronger than ever. That's the only story that matters. What the media didn't know, what they could never know, was the full scope of what I had accomplished.
Dr.
Amanda Foster had been found dead in her apartment 6 months ago, officially ruled a suicide, but actually the final move in the CIA's cleanup operation. The entire espionage network had been neutralized, with most members either dead or imprisoned. American defense secrets were safe, and I had been quietly rewarded for my cooperation with government contracts worth over $500 million. There is one other matter, I announced, producing a folder that had been delivered to my office that morning. We've received an acquisition proposal that I think you'll find interesting. I opened the folder to reveal financial statements and corporate documents for Wright Industries, Nathan's family business, the company his father had built and Nathan had inherited before his arrest. The Wright family business is failing, I explained. Nathan's conviction destroyed their reputation, their clients are fleeing, and they're facing bankruptcy within 6 months. Rachel Torres smiled with understanding. You want to acquire Nathan Wright's family company? I want to own everything that was ever his, I corrected. Wright Industries will become a subsidiary of Barry Memorial Corporation. The Wright name will disappear from the business world forever, and their clients will be protected by a company that actually values integrity. The vote was unanimous. Within 30 days, I would own the business that Nathan's family had spent 3 generations building. It would be the final humiliation for a man who had called me a thing, knowing that even his family legacy belonged to the woman he had tried to destroy. After the board meeting, I drove to Camden School for his graduation ceremony. At 10 years old, my grandson had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate child who understood the difference between right and wrong in ways his parents never had. Grandma. Camden ran to me across the school courtyard, his diploma clutched in his small hands. I graduated. I'm going to middle school. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, I said, lifting him into my arms despite his protests that he was too old for such displays of affection. You've worked so hard this year. Will you come to the celebration dinner? I wouldn't miss it for the world. As we walked toward the school's dining hall, I noticed other parents watching us with expressions ranging from admiration to fear. My story had become legend in certain circles. The billionaire grandmother who had destroyed an entire criminal network to protect her family. Some people saw me as an inspiration, others as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unlimited power. Grandma, Camden said quietly, some kids at school say you're famous because you hurt bad people. What do you think about that? Camden considered the question with the seriousness that children bring to complex moral issues. I think you protected our family. Daddy and Mommy made bad choices, and you made sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. That's exactly right, sweetheart. Sometimes protecting the people you love means making difficult decisions. Will I ever see Mommy and Daddy again? It was a question Camden asked periodically, and my answer was always the same. Your parents made choices that have consequences, Camden. They're in prison because they committed serious crimes. But you're safe now, and you're loved, and that's what matters most. After Camden's graduation dinner, I returned to my penthouse to find Jackson Pierce waiting with his final report on the Wright network investigation. Mrs. Barry, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, it's finished. Every member of Nathan's criminal organization has been either arrested, convicted, or eliminated. The espionage ring has been completely dismantled. And the CIA's involvement? Classified and buried. As far as the public will ever know, Nathan Wright was just a financial criminal who murdered your husband for insurance money. The national security implications will never see the light of day. I opened Jackson's folder, reviewing the final accounting of my 2-year war of revenge. Nathan Wright, Life in prison without parole. Jessica Wright, serving 8 years for conspiracy and money laundering. 4 Meridian financial executives, convicted of embezzlement and fraud. Luis Moreno and Vincent Carrera, dead by my hand. James Patterson, brain dead from CIA-administered drugs. Dr. Amanda Foster, suicide by government assassination. 17 other network associates, various fates ranging from prison to mysterious accidents. How do you feel about it all? Jackson asked. I considered the question carefully. How did I feel about transforming from a grandmother into an avenging angel? About crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed? About becoming someone who solved problems with bullets and government connections? I feel like justice was served, I said finally. Nathan Wright called me a thing, dismissed me as beneath his notice, and murdered my husband for money. In response, I destroyed everything he valued, his freedom, his family, his legacy, his life. The scales are balanced. And the cost. I had lost my daughter to her own criminal choices and government prosecution. I had lost my innocence about violence and revenge. I had lost the woman Charles had married and become someone who could order executions with the same casualness other people ordered coffee. But I had gained something too: power, protection, and the absolute certainty that no one would ever threaten my family again. The cost was worth paying, I said. Camden is safe, my husband's murder has been avenged, and the criminals who destroyed my family have been eliminated. Some prices are worth paying. Jackson nodded, understanding in his eyes. What happens now? Now we build, I said, walking to the window that overlooked the city where I had fought and won my war. Barry Memorial Corporation will become the most powerful financial empire in the country. We'll protect other families from the kind of predators that destroyed mine. And we'll make sure that anyone who thinks about threatening innocent people understands the consequences. As Jackson left my office, I remained at the window, watching the lights of Manhattan twinkle in the darkness. Somewhere in a federal prison, Nathan Wright was lying on a narrow cot, knowing that the woman he had humiliated now owned his family's business. Somewhere in another prison, Jessica was counting down the years until her release, understanding that her choice of cruelty over loyalty had cost her everything. But here in my tower, in my empire, Camden was safe and loved and growing into the kind of man his grandfather would have been proud of. Here, justice had been served not by courts and laws, but by the relentless application of power and resources in service of family protection. My phone buzzed with a text message from Detective Sarah Chin. Mrs. Barry, the Moreno/Carrera case has been officially closed as unsolved. Thank you for your cooperation with the investigation. I smiled, deleting the message. Some cases were meant to remain unsolved, some justice was meant to be private, and some monsters were meant to disappear without a trace. 3 hours later, I stood in Camden's dormitory room, watching my grandson sleep peacefully for the first time in 2 years. No more nightmares about his parents' crimes. No more questions about why his family had been destroyed. No more fear about his future. Sweet dreams, my darling boy, I whispered, kissing his forehead. You're safe now. Forever. As I drove back to my penthouse, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I had been a humiliated grandmother, dismissed as a thing by a man who thought wealth and class made him untouchable. Tonight, I was the head of a billion-dollar empire, protected by government connections and feared by anyone who might threaten my family. Nathan Wright had wanted to destroy me, to eliminate the embarrassment of my supposed poverty from his perfect life. Instead, he had awakened something in me that he never could have imagined, the capacity for absolute, methodical, devastating revenge. The transformation had cost me my innocence, my daughter, and perhaps my soul, but it had given me power, security, and the absolute certainty that Camden would grow up in a world where his family's enemies had been systematically eliminated. Some might call what I had done monstrous. Others might see it as justice long overdue. But as I looked out at the city spread below my tower, I knew that I had become exactly what people like Nathan Wright deserved. Someone who remembered every slight, repaid every cruelty, and ensured that predators faced consequences they never saw coming. Nathan Wright had called me a thing. But things don't build empires. Things don't orchestrate the destruction of criminal networks. Things don't transform from victims into avengers who reshape the world according to their own vision of justice.
Monsters do.
And I had become the most dangerous kind of monster. One with unlimited resources, government protection, and absolutely nothing left to lose except the grandson who had made it all worthwhile. The birthday party where it all began seemed like a lifetime ago. The woman who had been humiliated and dismissed as beneath notice no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned that power wasn't about money or class or social position. It was about the willingness to do whatever was necessary to protect the people you loved. Nathan Wright had taught me that lesson, and I had taught him the price of underestimating the wrong grandmother. The scales of justice were finally, permanently, and completely balanced. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of justice, revenge, and ultimate triumph. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the power of protecting family at any cost, please subscribe to Her True Stories and hit that notification bell. Share this story with others who need to hear it, because sometimes the most important lessons come from the darkest places. Remember, never underestimate someone based on their appearance, their age, or their apparent circumstances. You never know who might be a billionaire in disguise, waiting for the perfect moment to show you exactly what real power looks like. Until next time, this is Bridget Berry, reminding you that family is everything, justice comes in many forms, and some enemies deserve exactly what they get. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that you're not worthy of respect.